It was late April in 1877, and the spring air carried the scent of tobacco fields and river water as she stepped down onto the dusty street, her single worn carpet bag clutched in trembling fingers. The dress she wore had been mended so many times that patches covered patches, and the bonnet on her head was faded to a color that might once have been blue but now resembled the gray of storm clouds. She had traveled for 3 weeks from Boston, answering an advertisement that had seemed like divine intervention when she had found it crumpled on the floor of the boarding house where she worked scrubbing the floors until her knuckles bled. Rancher seeking wife. Must be hard-working and of good character. Reply to Franklin Vance, Williamsburg, Virginia. Penelope had replied with shaking hands, her letter carefully worded, to present herself as capable and willing, without revealing too much about the circumstances that made her so desperate to leave Massachusetts. She had not mentioned the scars that crisscrossed her back like a map of suffering. She had not mentioned the burn mark on her left shoulder blade, or the crooked set of her pinky finger, where it had healed wrong after being broken. She had not mentioned her former employer, a man whose wife had died, and who had decided that the help he had hired was now his property to use as he pleased. The reply had come within 2 weeks, along with money for passage. The handwriting was neat and practical, the words straightforward. He would meet her at the trading post on April 23rd. He owned a horse ranch 5 miles outside town. He was 32 years old, never married, and expected honesty and hard work in return for his name and protection. Penelope was 24 years old, and she carried no illusions about romance. She wanted safety. She wanted a place where she could sleep without barring the door with a chair. She wanted to stop flinching every time a man raised his voice. If she had to marry a stranger to get those things, then she would do it with gratitude. The trading post was a weathered building with a covered porch where several men sat smoking and watching the street with the lazy interest of those who had nowhere else to be. Penelope kept her eyes down as she climbed the steps, aware of their gazes following her movement. Inside, the proprietor looked up from his ledger and nodded toward a corner where a tall man stood, examining a new saddle that hung from the rafters. Franklin Vance was not what she had expected, though she realized she had formed no clear picture in her mind anyway. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His hair was dark brown and slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into the sun. He wore simple clothing, a cotton shirt and denim pants, boots that were scuffed but well maintained. There was a quiet confidence in the way he stood, feet planted solidly, hands relaxed at his sides. When he turned and saw her, something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. His eyes, she noticed, were a surprising shade of gray-green, like river stones. He crossed the space between them in a few long strides and removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "Miss Vincent?" His voice was deep and measured, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent his whole life in Virginia. "Yes?" Her own voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Mr. Vance." "Franklin, just Franklin." He studied her face for a long moment, and she forced herself not to look away, even though every instinct screamed at her to lower her gaze, to make herself smaller, to disappear. "You had a long journey." "Yes." She could not seem to form any words beyond that single syllable. Her mouth was dry, her tongue thick. He frowned slightly, then seemed to come to some decision. "You must be hungry. There is a restaurant across the street. We can talk there, and then head to the ranch if you are still willing." The phrasing caught her attention. "If you are still willing," as though she had some choice in the matter, as though she could change her mind. She nodded mutely and followed him out of the trading post, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked their progress across the street. The restaurant was small and clean, with checkered cloths on the tables and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Franklin chose a table near the back and held out a chair for her, waiting until she was seated, before taking his own seat across from her. When the server came, he ordered for them both without asking her preference, and she felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. But the meal he ordered was simple and generous, roasted chicken and vegetables and fresh rolls with butter. And when it arrived, he pushed the plate closer to her. "Eat," he said quietly. "You look like you have not had a decent meal in some time." She wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She picked up her fork with hands that shook slightly and took a small bite of chicken. It was tender and seasoned with herbs, better than anything she had tasted in months. She took another bite, then another, trying to eat slowly, but unable to help herself. Franklin ate his own meal without comment, but she could feel him watching her. Finally, when she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger, he set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "I should tell you what to expect," he said. "The ranch is not fancy. I have a house, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor. I have been managing on my own for 3 years since my father passed, so it is clean enough but not what a woman might consider comfortable. I have 12 horses currently, with plans to expand the herd. I break and train them, sell them to local buyers, and sometimes to the cavalry. It is hard work, sunrise to sunset most days." Penelope nodded, her hands folded in her lap beneath the table, where he could not see them twisting together nervously. "I need help with the household tasks," he continued. "Cooking, cleaning, mending. I can manage basic meals, but I am no cook. I also need help with the books, keeping track of expenses and sales. My mother used to handle those things, and since she passed 5 years ago, I have been muddling through on my own." "I can do those things," Penelope said softly. "I worked in a boarding house. I know how to keep a household running." Franklin nodded slowly. "I will not lie to you, Miss Vincent. I am not looking for a love match. I am looking for a partner, someone who can manage a home while I manage the horses. I will treat you with respect and expect the same in return. I will provide for you, keep you safe, give you my name and whatever protection that offers." He paused, his gray-green eyes searching her face. "In return, I ask for honesty and hard work, and I ask that you tell me now if there is anything I should know, anything that might affect our arrangement." Penelope felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to decide how much truth to tell. She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars on her knuckles from years of harsh lye soap and rough work. She thought about the scars he could not see, the ones hidden beneath her carefully mended dress. "I have no family," she said quietly. "My parents died of influenza when I was 16. I have been working since then to support myself. I am not." She struggled to find the right words. "I am not bringing anything to this marriage except my willingness to work. No dowry, no connections, no prospects. If you are expecting more than that, you should say so now." Franklin was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I read something in your letter," he said slowly. "Something between the lines. You wrote that you were seeking a new situation, a fresh start. Those are careful words, Miss Vincent, the kind of words someone uses when they are running from something." Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. Her first instinct was to deny it, to construct some plausible story that would satisfy him without revealing too much. But something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. He was not looking at her with suspicion or anger. He was looking at her with something that might have been understanding. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked quietly. "With the law?" "No." The word came out quickly, firmly. "Nothing like that. I have done nothing illegal." "Then what are you running from?" She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "A situation that was not safe, an employer who believed he had the right to more than my labor." The words were careful, but she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Franklin's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something hard and dangerous flashed across his face. Then he took a slow breath and nodded. "I see. And did this employer follow you? Is there any chance he might come looking for you here?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "He has no reason to look for me. I was just a servant, easily replaced. I left in the middle of the night and made sure not to leave any trace of where I was going." Franklin studied her for another long moment, then nodded again. "All right. Then, as far as I'm concerned, whatever happened in Boston stays in Boston. You start fresh here, with my name and my protection. And I give you my word, Miss Vincent, that I will never raise a hand to you, and I will never force myself on you. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not ownership." Penelope felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. She searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that he was saying what she wanted to hear, only to change his behavior once they were alone at his ranch. But his expression was open and earnest, and there was something in his eyes that made her want to believe him. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you need a mail-order bride? You seem like a decent man with a good property. Surely there are women in Williamsburg who would be interested. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You would think so, but I have never been much for socializing, and after my mother passed, I let the social niceties slip. I am not good at small talk or courting rituals. I am better with horses than people, and the few women I have tried to court made it clear they were not interested in living on a ranch 5 miles outside town, doing hard work for a man who spends most of his time in the stables. He shrugged. I figured a practical arrangement might suit better than trying to pretend to be something I'm not. There was an honesty in his words that resonated with Penelope. She understood the feeling of not fitting into expected roles, of being judged and found wanting by society's standards. I am not afraid of hard work, she said quietly, and I have no illusions about romance. A practical arrangement suits me well. Franklin nodded and extended his hand across the table. Then let us shake on it, partners in a practical arrangement. We will go to the minister this afternoon and make it legal and then head to the ranch. Does that suit you? Penelope looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then reached out and placed her own hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. That suits me, she said. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Franklin paid the bill and led her down the street to a small white church. The minister was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Franklin explained they wanted to be married immediately. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with the minister's housekeeper and the church sexton serving as witnesses. Penelope spoke her vows in a voice that barely carried, while Franklin's responses were clear and steady. When it was done, the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Franklin placed a simple gold band on her finger that had belonged to his mother. They walked back to the trading post where Franklin had left his wagon, a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 dappled gray horses. He loaded her carpetbag in the back and then helped her up onto the seat, his hands careful and impersonal. Then he climbed up beside her, took up the reins, and guided the horses out of town. The road to the ranch was rutted and dusty, winding through tobacco fields and patches of forest where dogwood trees bloomed white against the green. Franklin pointed out landmarks as they went. The creek that marked the border of his property, the old oak tree where his father had built him a treehouse as a boy. He spoke easily, without pressure for her to respond, and Penelope found herself relaxing slightly as the miles passed. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, and Penelope caught her breath at the sight of it. The house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The wood was weathered but well-maintained, and flower boxes beneath the windows held the remnants of last year's plantings. Behind the house stood a large barn, a stable, and several paddocks where horses grazed in the late afternoon sun. Franklin brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Penelope descend. She stood for a moment, taking in the property, and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion that made everything seem softer than it was. Let me show you around, Franklin said, grabbing her carpetbag from the back of the wagon. He led her up onto the porch and through the front door into a parlor that was simply furnished but clean. There was a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, a rocking chair, a bookshelf filled with volumes that looked well read. The kitchen beyond was spacious, with a cast-iron stove, a pump for water, a large wooden table. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. Franklin showed her the largest, which had clearly been his parents' room, with a large bed covered in a faded quilt and a wardrobe against one wall. This can be your room, he said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. I have been using the room down the hall. I thought you might want your own space, at least at first, until we figure out how this arrangement will work. Penelope felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting him to see. Thank you, she managed. That is very kind. Franklin looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It is just practical. We are strangers after all. No sense rushing into things. He cleared his throat. I need to go check on the horses and settle them for the night. Take your time getting settled. There is food in the pantry if you are hungry. I will be back in a couple hours, and we can figure out supper. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs. Penelope stood in the center of the bedroom, listening to the front door close behind him, and then slowly sank down onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She looked around at the simple furnishings, the curtains that needed washing, the floor that could use a good scrubbing, and felt something settle inside her. This was hers now. This room, this house, this life. She was Penelope Vance, wife of Franklin Vance, mistress of this small ranch in Virginia. She was no longer at the mercy of cruel employers or the dangers of being a woman alone in the world. She had a home. She stood and began to unpack her carpet bag, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the wardrobe and placing her few personal items on the dresser. A hairbrush with half its bristles missing, a small Bible that had been her mother's, a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, one of the few things she had kept from her childhood. When everything was put away, she went back downstairs and began to explore the kitchen properly. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans. There were preserved vegetables in jars, likely left from the previous year's harvest. In the cold cellar, she found eggs and butter, a ham hanging from a hook. She selected ingredients methodically, planning a simple meal of ham and beans with cornbread. It felt strange to be cooking in someone else's kitchen, using someone else's pots and pans, but also oddly right. This was her kitchen now, her responsibility. She had the meal well underway when Franklin returned, smelling of horses and hay. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, surprise evident on his face. "You did not have to cook tonight," he said. "You just arrived. You must be exhausted." "I am fine," Penelope replied, stirring the pot of beans. "And we both need to eat. Besides, I wanted to see what supplies you had, get a sense of the kitchen." Franklin crossed to the pump and washed his hands, then leaned against the counter watching her work. "You are efficient," he observed. "My mother would have approved." "Tell me about her," Penelope said, surprising herself with the request. "Your mother, what was she like?" Franklin was quiet for a moment, his expression distant. "She was strong," he said finally. "Not in a loud way, but in a steady way. She could birth a foal in the middle of the night and still have breakfast on the table at dawn. She taught me to respect the horses, to understand that breaking them was not about dominating them, but about building trust." He smiled slightly. "She also had no patience for foolishness. If I tracked mud into her kitchen, I would be scrubbing floors for a week." Penelope smiled despite herself. "She sounds formidable." "She was. Cancer took her 5 years ago. It was slow and painful, and by the end, she was ready to go. But I still miss her every day." He glanced around the kitchen. "The house has not been the same without her. I keep things clean enough, but it is not a home anymore, just a place to sleep between work." "Maybe we can change that," Penelope said softly. "Between the two of us." Franklin met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "Maybe," he agreed. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Penelope was acutely aware of every movement, every sound, waiting for some sign that Franklin's polite demeanor was a facade that would crack to reveal something darker. But he simply ate his meal, complimented her cooking, and then helped her clean up the dishes without being asked. As darkness fell, Franklin lit lamps throughout the house and then stood awkwardly in the parlor, clearly uncertain how to end the evening. "I usually read for a bit before bed," he said. "You are welcome to join me, or you can retire if you are tired." "I think I will go up," Penelope said. "It has been a very long day." "Of course." Franklin stepped aside to let her pass, careful not to stand too close. "Sleep well, Penelope. If you need anything in the night, I am just down the hall." She nodded and climbed the stairs, her legs heavy with exhaustion. In her room, she changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, then slipped between the sheets of her new bed. The house was quiet around her, just the settling sounds of old wood and the distant call of night birds. She lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep, but finding her mind too active. She thought about the man who was now her husband, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than she had experienced in years. She thought about his steady gray-green eyes and the way he had looked at her in the restaurant, as though he could see past the careful walls she had built around herself. She thought about his words, "I will never raise a hand to you, and I will never force myself on you." Could she trust those words? Could she trust him? Only time would tell. But for tonight, she was safe and warm and fed, and that was more than she had dared to hope for when she stepped off the stagecoach this morning. Penelope closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that was both strange and strangely comforting. Penelope rose at dawn and prepared breakfast while Franklin did the early morning chores in the stable. They ate together, speaking little but companionably, and then Franklin would head out to work with the horses while Penelope tackled the household tasks. There was plenty to do. The house had been neglected in the way of a place inhabited by a man living alone, clean on the surface but lacking in the deeper maintenance that kept a home truly running well. Penelope threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed curtains and hung them to dry in the spring sunshine, beat rugs and mended linens. She reorganized the pantry and made lists of supplies they would need. She planted flowers in the boxes beneath the windows and started a vegetable garden in the patch of ground behind the kitchen. Franklin watched her transformation of his house with something like wonder. He never commented directly, but she would catch him looking around the parlor in the evening, taking in the fresh curtains and the flowers on the side table, and a small smile would cross his face. He was, she discovered, a man of few words but consistent actions. He rose early and worked hard, his days spent training horses with a patience and gentleness that surprised her. She would watch sometimes from the kitchen window as he worked with a young mare in the paddock, speaking to her in a low, steady voice, never raising his hand in anger, even when the horse shied or refused. His methods were slow but effective, and she saw the results in the way the horses responded to him, with trust rather than fear. In the evenings, they would sit together in the parlor. Franklin read or worked on repairing tack, while Penelope sewed or knitted. Sometimes he would read aloud, passages from books about horse breeding or agriculture, and she found herself drawn into his world through these small glimpses. Sometimes they talked, simple conversations about the day's work or plans for the ranch. Slowly, carefully, they were learning each other, but Penelope was still careful. She dressed and undressed in her room with the door locked. She flinched when Franklin moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. She kept her arms covered even in the heat, unwilling to let him see the scars that marked her skin, and Franklin, for his part, respected her boundaries with a patience that made her want to weep. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Franklin came into the kitchen where Penelope was preparing supper and cleared his throat awkwardly. "There is a dance in town this Saturday," he said. "A spring social at the church. Most of the ranchers and townspeople attend. I was thinking we should go, let people meet you properly. Folks have been asking about my new wife." Penelope felt panic flutter in her chest. A social gathering meant people, strangers, questions. It meant being looked at and judged. But she also understood the necessity. They lived in a small community, and as Franklin's wife, she would be expected to participate in social occasions. "All right," she said quietly, "if you think it is important." "I think it would be good for you to meet some of the women," Franklin said. "You have been working so hard around here. You deserve an evening out. And Martha Henderson has been pestering me to bring you by. She is our nearest neighbor, lives about 2 miles west. Good woman, has 5 children, and runs that household like a general runs an army." Penelope managed a small smile. "She sounds formidable." "She is, but kind. I think you would like her." Franklin hesitated, then added, "You can wear one of my mother's dresses if you would like. She was about your size, and she had some nice things for special occasions. They are just sitting in the wardrobe in her old room, doing no one any good." Penelope thought of her 2 threadbare dresses, neither of which was suitable for a social dance. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. "Thank you," she said. "That would be helpful." The dress Franklin showed her was beautiful, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered around the collar and cuffs. It fit Penelope almost perfectly, needing only minor adjustments to the hem. She spent the next few evenings altering it, her stitches small and precise, and tried not to think too hard about wearing a dead woman's clothes to meet the living. Saturday arrived sunny and warm, perfect weather for a social. Penelope dressed carefully, pinning her hair up in a style she had not worn since before her life fell apart in Boston. When she came downstairs, Franklin was waiting in the parlor, wearing clean clothes and looking distinctly uncomfortable in a collar and tie. "You look lovely," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her blush. "Thank you." "You look very handsome." He grimaced. "I look like I am being strangled by this tie, but Mother always said a man should make an effort for social occasions, even if it kills him." Penelope laughed, surprising herself. It had been so long since she had laughed that the sound seemed foreign, rusty from disuse. but Franklin smiled at the sound, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. The ride into town was pleasant, the spring countryside lush and green. Franklin pointed out various landmarks and filled her in on the people they would meet, describing personalities and connections with a dry humor she was learning to appreciate. By the time they arrived at the church, where music was already spilling out into the evening air, Penelope felt slightly less anxious. The social was held in the church hall, a large room decorated with streamers and spring flowers. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and musicians played fiddle and guitar at the far end. The room was filled with people, families and couples and clusters of young people laughing together. Penelope felt overwhelmed by the noise and the crowd, but Franklin kept a steady hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the room. Martha Henderson descended on them within minutes, a plump woman with graying hair and a smile that seemed to encompass the world. "Franklin Vance, you have been hiding this poor girl away for weeks. Shame on you." She turned to Penelope and took both her hands in a warm grip. "Welcome, dear. I am Martha Henderson, and I am so pleased to finally meet you. You must tell me all about yourself." Before Penelope could respond, Martha had steered her away from Franklin toward a group of women gathered near the refreshment table. They welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth and curiosity, asking questions about her journey and her impressions of Virginia. Penelope answered as best she could, carefully editing her past into something bland and unremarkable. One woman, younger than the others with sharp eyes and a sharper smile, looked Penelope up and down with barely concealed assessment. "That is a beautiful dress," she said. "It looks familiar somehow." "It was my mother-in-law's," Penelope said quietly. "Franklin offered it to me for this evening." "How generous of him." The woman's tone suggested something other than generosity, but before Penelope could puzzle out the implication, Martha Henderson intervened smoothly. "Sarah Miller, do not start trouble. Penelope is family now, and we welcome her." She turned to Penelope with a kind smile. "Do not mind Sarah. She had her cap set for Franklin a few years back, but he was too thick-headed to notice." Sarah's face flushed red, but she said nothing more. The conversation moved on to safer topics, recipes and gardening, and the upcoming county fair. Penelope found herself relaxing slightly, drawn in by Martha's warm inclusion and the genuine friendliness of most of the women. Across the room, Franklin stood with a group of ranchers, but his eyes kept drifting back to where Penelope stood. When the musicians struck up a lively tune and couples began to move to the center of the room to dance, he excused himself and made his way back to her side. "Would you dance with me?" he asked, offering his hand. Penelope hesitated. She had not danced in years, and the thought of being so close to him, of his hands on her waist, made her nervous. But every eye in the room was on them, and she understood that this was expected, that refusing would cause talk. "All right," she said softly, placing her hand in his. Franklin led her to the dance floor and drew her into the proper position for a waltz. His hand was warm at her waist, his grip on her other hand firm but gentle. As the music began, he guided her through the steps with surprising grace. "I did not know you could dance," Penelope murmured. "My mother insisted I learn. She said a gentleman should be able to dance at his own wedding, at least." He smiled slightly. "Of course, when I got married, we did not have a dance. Just a quick ceremony and back to the ranch." "I am sorry," Penelope said. "You should have had a proper wedding." "I have no complaints." Franklin's eyes met hers, and there was something in their depths that made her breath catch. "This suits me fine. Dancing with my wife at a social, letting the whole town see that I am the luckiest man here." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You do not need to say such things." "I am not saying it because I need to. I am saying it because it is true." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You have transformed that house in 3 weeks, Penelope. You have made it a home again, and you work harder than anyone I have ever known. I am grateful to you." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just let him guide her through the dance. As they moved together, she became aware of the way their bodies fit, the way he anticipated her movements and adjusted his own to accommodate her. It was nothing like the few times men had grabbed at her in the boarding house, rough and demanding. This was different, a partnership of movement, respectful and careful. When the song ended, Franklin released her and stepped back, but not before she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like longing. They stayed at the social for another 2 hours, dancing twice more and making conversation with neighbors. By the time they climbed back into the wagon for the ride home, Penelope was exhausted but felt something warm in her chest that might have been happiness. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But when Franklin helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "I know being around so many strangers must have been difficult, but you handled it beautifully." "Everyone was very kind," Penelope replied. "Martha especially. She invited me to visit her next week." "You should go. It would be good for you to have friends." Franklin hesitated, then added, "You have been working so hard since you arrived. You deserve time to yourself, time to do things that bring you joy." Penelope looked up at him in the moonlight, at his earnest face and steady eyes, and felt something shift inside her. This man who had started as a stranger, a means to escape, was becoming something more. She was not sure what to call it yet, but it felt important, significant. "Good night, Franklin," she said softly. "Good night, Penelope." She went inside and up to her room, and as she changed out of the blue dress and hung it carefully in the wardrobe, she thought about the way Franklin had looked at her on the dance floor. She thought about the respect he showed her every day, the way he never pushed for more than she was willing to give. And for the first time since she had arrived in Virginia, she let herself wonder what it might be like to truly be his wife, not just in name and practical arrangement, but in all the ways that mattered. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with a strange, tentative hope. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it long days of heat and humidity that made working outdoors almost unbearable. Penelope adapted to the rhythm of the ranch, rising before dawn to complete the heaviest chores before the worst of the heat set in. She tended her garden, which was flourishing under her careful attention, and spent afternoons preserving vegetables and making jam from the wild berries that grew along the edges of the property. Franklin worked from sunrise to well past sunset, training horses and managing the never-ending tasks that came with running a ranch. He had taken on 2 new colts to break, and Penelope would watch from the kitchen window as he worked with them, admiring his patience and skill. They had settled into a comfortable partnership, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken between them, a tension that grew stronger with each passing week. Franklin's eyes lingered on her more often, and she found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved through space, the sound of his voice, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. One afternoon in late June, Penelope was in the kitchen making bread when she heard a commotion from the paddock. She looked out the window and saw Franklin on the ground, one of the young horses rearing above him. Her heart stopped. Without thinking, she ran out of the house and across the yard, her skirts hiked up around her knees. By the time she reached the paddock fence, Franklin had rolled away from the horse's hooves and was getting to his feet, but she could see blood on his shirt. "Franklin?" She climbed the fence without hesitation, dropping into the paddock and running to his side. The young horse had retreated to the far side of the enclosure, still agitated but no longer aggressive. "I am fine," Franklin said, but his face was pale and he was holding his left arm at an odd angle. "You are bleeding." Penelope took his good arm and steered him toward the gate. "Come inside. Let me look at it." He tried to protest, but she ignored him, focusing all her attention on getting him into the house. In the kitchen, she made him sit at the table and carefully peeled away his shirt. There was a long gash on his upper arm where the horse's hoof had caught him, and already a bruise was forming. But the injury did not look too deep. "You need to be more careful," Penelope said, her hands trembling as she cleaned the wound. "That horse could have killed you." "He is just young and scared. I moved too fast, spooked him." Franklin watched her face as she worked, his expression unreadable. "You ran into the paddock without hesitation. That was dangerous." "You were in danger." The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by the fear still coursing through her veins. "What was I supposed to do? Stand there and watch?" Franklin caught her wrist gently, stilling her hands. "Penelope, look at me." She met his eyes, and the intensity she saw there made her breath catch. "You cared," he said softly. "You cared enough to run into danger for me." "Of course I cared." Her voice broke on the words. "You are my husband. I do not want to see you hurt." "I do not want to see you hurt either." His hand moved from her wrist to her cheek, his calloused palm surprisingly gentle against her skin. "These past 3 months, having you here, it has been—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I did not expect to care so much. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that, at least for me." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "Franklin, you do not have to say anything. I know we agreed this was just practical. But I want you to know that I see you, Penelope. I see how hard you work, how much care you put into everything you do. I see your strength." He paused, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "And I see the shadows in your eyes, the way you flinch sometimes when I move too fast. I see the scars you think you are hiding." Penelope jerked back as though burned, her hand flying to her collar. "What are you talking about?" Franklin's expression was infinitely gentle. "The day of the social, when you were getting ready, I walked past your room and the door was ajar. I did not mean to see, but I caught a glimpse of your back as you were dressing. I saw the scars, Penelope." She felt the blood drain from her face. Shame and panic warred inside her, and she stood abruptly, backing away from him. "You should have said something. You should have told me you knew." "Why? So you could be more afraid of me?" Franklin stood slowly, favoring his injured arm. "I did not say anything because it was not my business unless you wanted to tell me, and because I did not want you to think I saw you differently. Those scars do not change who you are." "They change everything," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "They mark me as damaged, as someone who was not strong enough to protect herself." "No." Franklin took a step toward her, but stopped when she flinched. "They mark you as a survivor. They mark you as someone who endured terrible things and still kept going, who still had the courage to travel across the country to build a new life. That is not weakness, Penelope. That is strength." She stared at him through tears, unable to speak. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Everyone who knew about her past, the few people she had confided in, had looked at her with pity or disgust. But Franklin was looking at her with respect, even admiration. "I see your strength," he repeated softly. "And I want you to know that here, in this house, you are safe. Not just from whoever hurt you before, but safe to be yourself, safe to heal, safe to trust, if you ever feel ready for that." The tears came harder now, years of suppressed emotion breaking through her careful control. Penelope sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She heard Franklin move closer, felt him kneel beside her chair. "Can I hold you?" he asked quietly. "Just hold you, nothing more. You look like you could use someone to lean on right now." She nodded, unable to speak, and felt his good arm come around her shoulders, drawing her against his chest. He was warm and solid, and he smelled of horses and sun-warmed cotton. She buried her face in his shoulder and cried for everything she had lost, everything she had endured, and everything she was afraid to hope for. Franklin held her through it all, his hand making slow circles on her back, his voice a low murmur of comfort. When her sobs finally subsided to hiccups and sniffles, he pressed a handkerchief into her hand and waited patiently while she composed herself. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to fall apart like that. Do not apologize. You needed to cry. Lord knows you have earned the right." Franklin eased back slightly so he could see her face. "Will you tell me what happened? You do not have to, but if you want to talk about it, I am here to listen." Penelope took a shaky breath and nodded. She told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush now that the dam had broken. She told him about losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, about the years of working in factories and boarding houses to survive. She told him about the man who had hired her to work in his home after his wife died, how he had seemed kind at first but gradually became more demanding, more cruel. She told him about the beatings when she did not meet his impossible standards, the night he came to her room with violence in his eyes, the way she had fought him off and fled into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back. Franklin listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "If he ever comes near you, I will kill him," he said flatly. "I am not a violent man, Penelope, but I will not hesitate to protect you. That is a promise." "He will not come," she said. "I made sure of it, and even if he did, he has no legal claim on me. I was never bound to him by indenture or debt. I was just an employee." "Good." Franklin stood and helped her to her feet. Then we will put him out of our minds and focus on the life we are building here. You are Penelope Vance now, and that is the only identity that matters. She looked up at him, at this man who had given her safety and respect and was now offering her something that looked like love. Franklin, I do not know if I can be the wife you deserve. I do not know if I will ever be able to. Hush. He cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. I do not have any expectations. Whatever you can give, whenever you are ready to give it, that is enough. And if you are never ready, that is all right too. I would rather have you here as you are than have some fantasy that does not exist. Penelope felt something break open inside her, some final wall she had been holding in place. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a tentative kiss that held years of loneliness and new hope. Franklin froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, his lips gentle against hers. It was nothing like the violent assault she had endured in Boston. This was soft and questioning, an offer rather than a demand. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I am ready to try, Penelope whispered. I am ready to trust you. Franklin smiled, and the joy in his expression made her heart ache. Then we will take it slow, and we will figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just us, building something real. That night, Penelope did not retreat to her separate bedroom. Instead, she followed Franklin upstairs to the room he had been using, and they lay together on top of the covers, fully clothed, just holding each other. Franklin stroked her hair and told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and the horses and the dreams he had for the future. And Penelope listened, her head on his chest, and let herself believe that she could be part of those dreams. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but it was more than she had dared to hope for. The rest of the summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work and growing affection. Penelope and Franklin navigated their new intimacy carefully, learning each other's boundaries and preferences. There were setbacks, moments when Penelope would panic and pull away, when old fears would rise up and threaten to overwhelm her. But Franklin was patient, never pushing, always giving her space to work through her emotions. Slowly, gradually, Penelope learned to trust his touch. She learned that not all physical contact was painful or frightening, that there could be pleasure and comfort in the closeness of another person. Franklin was gentle and attentive, constantly checking to make sure she was all right, ready to stop at any moment if she showed signs of distress. By the time autumn arrived, painting the Virginia countryside in shades of gold and crimson, they had become true partners in every sense of the word. Penelope no longer slept in the spare bedroom. She woke each morning in Franklin's arms, and she fell asleep each night with his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. Franklin's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and buyers came from as far as Richmond to purchase his animals. Penelope managed the household and the finances with quiet efficiency, freeing Franklin to focus on the work he loved. They talked about expanding the operation, perhaps hiring a hand or two to help with the increased workload. In October, Martha Henderson hosted a quilting bee and invited Penelope along with half a dozen other women from the area. Penelope had been nervous about attending, worried that she would not fit in, but Martha's warmth and the genuine friendliness of the other women put her at ease. They worked on a quilt for Martha's daughter, who was getting married in the spring, and the conversation flowed easily as they stitched. At one point, when several of the women had stepped outside for air, Martha leaned close to Penelope and spoke quietly. I hope you do not mind me saying, but you look happy, she said. Happier than when you first arrived. Marriage to Franklin suits you. Penelope felt her cheeks warm, but she smiled. He is a good man. Better than I deserve? Nonsense. You deserve every happiness. Martha paused, then added carefully. I am glad you found your way here, Penelope. Whatever brought you to Virginia, whatever you might have been running from, I hope you know that you have friends here now, people who care about you. Penelope's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you, Martha. That means more to me than you know. Martha patted her hand and returned to her stitching, and Penelope felt a wave of gratitude for this community that had welcomed her without question, that accepted her as one of their own. That night, as she and Franklin prepared for bed, Penelope found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in the 6 months since she had arrived in Williamsburg. She had come here expecting nothing more than safety and a roof over her head. Instead, she had found a home, friends, and a husband who loved her for exactly who she was. "What are you thinking about?" Franklin asked, pulling her into his arms as they settled beneath the quilts. "About how lucky I am," Penelope said softly. "About how different my life is now compared to 6 months ago." "I am the lucky one," Franklin murmured into her hair. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, working myself to exhaustion so I did not have to think about how empty the house felt. You brought life back into this place. You brought life back into me." Penelope tilted her head to kiss him, a long, slow kiss that communicated everything words could not. When they broke apart, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know we did not start this as a love match, but I cannot help how I feel. I love you, Penelope Vance." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I was capable of love anymore. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that I could trust again, that I could open my heart without fear." They held each other close as the autumn wind rattled the windows and the fire in the hearth burned low, and Penelope thought about how strange and wonderful it was that answering a simple advertisement in a newspaper could lead to this, to love and safety and a future full of possibilities. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it cold rains and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed somewhat, though there were still daily chores and horses to tend. Franklin used the quieter months to repair equipment and make improvements to the barn and stables. Penelope focused on preserving the last of the harvest and preparing the house for the cold months ahead. In December, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be certain, then another, before finally mentioning it to Franklin one evening as they sat before the fire. "I think I might be with child," she said quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Franklin looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder to pure joy. "Truly? I think so. It is still early, but all the signs are there." Franklin set aside his work and crossed to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about it? Are you happy?" Penelope thought about the question seriously. A year ago, the thought of bearing a child would have filled her with terror, but now, with Franklin, in this home they had built together, she felt only anticipation and hope. "I am happy," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "I am excited and terrified, but in a good way." Franklin laughed and pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of spun glass. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "You will be a wonderful father," Penelope assured him, "patient and kind, just like you are with the horses." "I hope I do not try to break our child like a horse," Franklin joked, and Penelope laughed. They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. Franklin was already making plans to convert the unused bedroom into a nursery, to build a cradle, and ensure the house was safe for a small child. As winter deepened, Penelope's pregnancy became more evident. She felt tired more easily and had to be careful not to overwork herself. Franklin became even more protective, insisting she rest more and taking over many of the heavier household tasks. Martha Henderson visited regularly, bringing advice and supplies and the comforting presence of a woman who had been through childbirth 5 times. "The first one is always the most frightening," Martha said one afternoon as they sat in the parlor drinking tea. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do, and I will be here with you when the time comes, along with the midwife. You will not be alone." Penelope squeezed Martha's hand gratefully. "I do not know what I would do without you." "You would manage just fine. You are stronger than you think, Penelope Vance." Martha smiled warmly. "But I am glad to help. That is what neighbors are for." Spring arrived with a burst of new growth and longer days. Penelope's garden needed planting, but she was too heavily pregnant now to do the work herself. Franklin hired a young man from town to help with the extra labor, both in the garden and around the ranch. With the additional help, Franklin was able to take on more training work, and the ranch's reputation continued to grow. In late April, almost exactly a year after Penelope had first arrived in Williamsburg, her labor began. It was a long and difficult process, lasting through the night and into the next day. Franklin paced the hallway outside the bedroom, nearly sick with worry, while Martha and the midwife attended to Penelope. When the baby's first cries finally rang through the house, Franklin burst into the room, despite Martha's protests. He found Penelope exhausted but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Franklin approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the small red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was screaming lustily, tiny fists waving in indignation. "He is perfect," Franklin breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on one they both loved. Now, looking at their son, Franklin thought of his father, the man who had built this ranch from nothing and taught him everything he knew about horses and hard work and treating people with respect. "Frederick," he said, "after my father, Frederick James Vance." Penelope smiled. "Frederick James Vance, I like it. Welcome to the world, little Frederick." The baby, as though recognizing his name, stopped crying and blinked up at his parents with unfocused blue eyes. Franklin reached out a tentative finger, and Frederick wrapped his tiny hand around it with surprising strength. "He has a good grip," Franklin said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is going to be a horseman, just like his grandfather." "Or perhaps he will be something entirely different," Penelope said gently. "A scholar or an artist or a lawyer. Whatever he chooses to be, we will support him." "Whatever he chooses to be," Franklin agreed. He leaned down to kiss Penelope's forehead. "Thank you. Thank you for our son, for this life, for everything." "Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible," Penelope replied. "Thank you for seeing my strength when I felt nothing but broken." They sat together, the new family, as the spring sunshine streamed through the bedroom window and the sounds of the ranch drifted up from below. And Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the terror and pain of her past to the love and security of her present. She thought about the advertisement that had changed her life, the leap of faith she had taken in answering it, the man who had met her at the trading post with kindness in his eyes. She had arrived in Virginia with nothing but scars and a desperate hope for something better. She was leaving that scared, broken woman behind and stepping fully into her new identity as Penelope Vance, wife and mother, beloved and secure. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing family that filled the house with laughter and chaos. Frederick was a sturdy, adventurous child who kept his parents constantly on their toes. By the time he was 3, Penelope was pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Florence after Penelope's mother. Florence was quiet where Frederick was loud, thoughtful where he was impulsive. She had Penelope's fair coloring and Franklin's gray-green eyes, and from an early age, she showed a remarkable affinity for animals, particularly horses. Franklin doted on her, teaching her to ride almost before she could walk, and she became his shadow around the ranch. 2 years after Florence came another son, Felix, who was the perfect blend of his siblings, equally at home with books and horses. As the family grew, so did the ranch. Franklin hired 2 full-time hands to help manage the increased workload, and they built additional stables and paddocks to accommodate the growing herd. Penelope managed it all with quiet efficiency, running the household and keeping the books while raising 3 active children. She had grown into her role as the mistress of the ranch, confident and capable in ways she never could have imagined when she first arrived. The scars on her back remained, permanent reminders of her past, but they no longer defined her. She was so much more than the sum of her traumas. The community of Williamsburg embraced the Vance family fully. Penelope became known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. When Martha Henderson fell ill one winter, Penelope organized meals and care from the women in the area, ensuring Martha's family was looked after. When a fire destroyed the church hall, Penelope led the fundraising effort to rebuild it. She was no longer the scared mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but scars. She was a pillar of the community, respected and loved. Franklin's reputation as a horse trainer reached beyond Virginia. Buyers came from as far as Washington and Philadelphia to purchase his horses, and he was frequently invited to demonstrate his methods at agricultural fairs and exhibitions. But no matter how successful the ranch became, he never lost sight of what mattered most: his family. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch as a family, watching the sun set over the paddocks. Frederick would be showing off some new trick he had learned. Florence would be brushing one of the barn cats, and Felix would be nestled in his mother's lap, listening to stories, and Franklin would sit beside Penelope, their hands intertwined, and marvel at the life they had built together. One such evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Franklin and Penelope remained on the porch, enjoying the cool night air and the chorus of crickets. "Do you remember the day we met?" Franklin asked, his arm around Penelope's shoulders. "Of course," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "I was terrified. I thought I was walking into another trap, another situation where I would be at someone's mercy. And instead I found you." She tilted her head to look up at him. "I found safety and respect, and eventually, love, more than I ever dreamed was possible." Franklin kissed the top of her head. "I saw something in you that day at the trading post. Behind all the fear and the careful walls, I saw strength. I saw someone who had survived terrible things and kept going. That is what made me certain you were the right choice, even before I knew anything else about you." "I did not feel strong," Penelope admitted. "I felt broken and used up. But you were not. You are not. Every day you prove how strong you are." Franklin tightened his arm around her. "You came here with nothing but scars, but you built a life, a family, a home. You took broken pieces and made them into something beautiful." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We did it together. I could not have done any of this without you." "Partners," Franklin said, echoing the word he had used on their wedding day a lifetime ago. "Partners," Penelope agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Then Penelope said softly, "Sometimes I think about the woman I was when I arrived here, how scared I was, how certain that I would never be whole again. And I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that she was going to find happiness beyond anything she could imagine." "She would not have believed you," Franklin said with a slight smile. "Probably not, but she would have been wrong." Penelope twisted the gold ring on her finger, the ring that had belonged to Franklin's mother, the ring that symbolized her new life. "I am grateful every single day for that advertisement, for your letter, for the choice to come here. It saved my life in every way that matters." "You saved mine too," Franklin said quietly. "I was so lonely before you came. I had convinced myself that I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone, but I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You brought joy back into this house, into my life. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just working myself to exhaustion." They kissed, a slow, sweet kiss full of years of shared history and deep, abiding love. When they finally went inside and up to bed, they held each other close, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The years continued to pass. Frederick grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He had a natural gift with horses and a quick mind for business. By the time he was 18, he was managing much of the day-to-day operations, allowing Franklin to slow down slightly and enjoy more time with his family. Florence, at 16, was a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, a profession that was just beginning to open to women. Franklin and Penelope supported her ambitions wholeheartedly, setting aside money for her education and encouraging her to pursue her passions. Felix, at 14, was the scholar of the family. He loved books and learning, and his teachers in town said he had a brilliant mind. He talked about going to university, perhaps becoming a lawyer or a teacher. Like his siblings, he knew he had his parents' full support no matter what path he chose. On a warm spring day in 1893, 16 years after Penelope had first arrived in Williamsburg, the Vance family gathered on the porch for a photograph. It was a special occasion, their wedding anniversary, and also the anniversary of Penelope's arrival in Virginia. Franklin had arranged for a photographer from Richmond to come to the ranch, wanting to commemorate the milestone. They posed formally at first, Franklin and Penelope seated in chairs with their 3 children standing behind them. But the photographer, sensing the warmth and closeness of the family, suggested a more casual arrangement. So they rearranged themselves, laughing and joking, until they were clustered together in a natural grouping that captured the genuine affection they shared. After the formal photographs were complete, the photographer packed up his equipment and departed. The family remained on the porch, enjoying the beautiful spring weather and each other's company. "I cannot believe it has been 16 years, Penelope said, leaning against Franklin's shoulder. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." 16 years of happiness, Franklin replied. "The best years of my life." Frederick cleared his throat. "Father, Mother, I have something I want to discuss with you, something important." Penelope and Franklin exchanged glances, then turned their attention to their eldest son. "What is it?" Penelope asked. "I have been thinking about the future of the ranch," Frederick began. "With your permission, I would like to start expanding our operations. I have been researching new breeding techniques, and I think we could develop a line of horses specifically suited for cavalry work. The demand is growing, especially with tensions rising internationally." Franklin listened as Frederick outlined his plans, impressed by the thoroughness of his research and the maturity of his thinking. "What do you think?" he asked Penelope quietly. "I think our son has inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business," Penelope replied with a smile. "I think he is ready to take on more responsibility." They spent the next hour discussing Frederick's proposal, asking questions and offering suggestions. By the end of the conversation, they had agreed to let Frederick move forward with his plans, with Franklin serving as an advisor and mentor. "I am proud of you, son," Franklin said, clasping Frederick's shoulder. "You are going to do great things." "I learned from the best," Frederick replied, his voice thick with emotion. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the family settled into their familiar evening routine. Florence went to tend to her favorite horse. Felix retreated to his room to study, and Frederick headed to the barn to check on a mare that was close to foaling. Franklin and Penelope remained on the porch, watching the activity of the ranch wind down for the day. It was a scene they had witnessed thousands of times, but it never lost its beauty or significance. "We did well," Franklin said softly. "Raising those three, they are good people, all of them, kind and hard-working and principled." "They learned from watching you," Penelope replied. "You showed them what it means to treat others with respect, to work hard, to build something meaningful. You gave them a foundation that will serve them well, no matter where life takes them." "We did it together," Franklin corrected gently. "Everything we have, everything we built, it is because of both of us working as partners." Penelope smiled and kissed his cheek. "Partners," she agreed. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, they finally went inside, ready to face whatever the future might bring with the same courage and commitment that had carried them through the past 16 years. The future did bring changes, as it always does. Frederick married a local girl named Sarah Thompson, and they had a son of their own, making Franklin and Penelope grandparents for the first time. Florence pursued her dreams and became one of the first female veterinarians in Virginia, eventually taking over much of the animal care at the ranch and in the surrounding community. Felix went to university as planned, studying law, and after graduation, he opened a practice in Williamsburg, providing legal services to local families and farmers. Through it all, Franklin and Penelope remained the steady center of their growing family. The ranch continued to prosper, now managed by Frederick with his father's guidance. The house that had once been so empty and quiet now rang with the voices of children and grandchildren, filled with life and love. On a cool evening in October 1902, 25 years after Penelope had first stepped off the stagecoach in Williamsburg, she and Franklin sat in their usual spot on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. Their hair was graying now, their faces lined with the passage of years, but their love had only deepened with time. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not answered my advertisement?" Franklin asked, his arm around her shoulders. Penelope shivered, and not from the cold. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. That life is so far removed from this one that it almost feels like it happened to someone else." "In a way it did," Franklin said. "That frightened young woman who arrived with nothing but scars and desperate hope. She is not who you are anymore. You became someone new here, someone stronger and happier." "I became who I was always meant to be," Penelope said softly. "I just needed the right place and the right person to help me get there." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with love. "You saw something in me that I could not see in myself. You saw my strength when all I felt was weakness. You gave me the space and the safety to heal, and you loved me through all of it. You gave me a life worth living." Franklin pulled her closer. "And you gave me the same. A life full of love and purpose and joy. A family, a real home, not just a house. Everything that matters to me, I have because you came into my life. They sat together as the sun set, painting the Virginia sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. In the distance, they could hear Frederick calling to the horses, Florence laughing with her husband, Felix's children playing in the yard. The ranch was alive with the sounds of family, the legacy they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and enduring love. I love you, Penelope Vance, Franklin said, as he had said countless times over the years. But the words never lost their power, never became routine or empty. I love you, Franklin Vance, Penelope replied, today, tomorrow, and always. As the stars emerged overhead and the cool autumn breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and horses, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built a life and a love that would endure for generations. Penelope had arrived in Virginia with nothing but scars and fear, and Franklin had seen past all of it to the strength beneath. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of compassion, patience, and true partnership. And as they finally rose and went inside to the warm, bright house filled with the voices of their family, Penelope reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had survived horrors that would have broken many people. She had found the courage to take a chance on a future she could barely imagine. She had learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in happiness. She had arrived with nothing but scars, but those scars had healed into something beautiful. Proof not of her brokenness, but of her incredible strength. And Franklin had seen that strength from the very beginning, had honored it and nurtured it, had helped her see herself through his eyes. Together, they had built a life beyond anything either of them had dreamed possible. And that life, full of love and family and purpose, was the greatest achievement of all. The evening drew to a close with the entire family gathered around the dinner table, 3 generations sharing a meal and stories and laughter. Frederick told jokes that made his children giggle. Florence discussed her latest case with animated gestures. Felix debated politics with his father, while his wife gently teased him. And Penelope sat at the head of the table, watching it all with a full heart, knowing that this was what mattered. This was what she had fought for and found. When the meal was over and the dishes were cleared and the family began to disperse to their own homes and bedrooms, Franklin took Penelope's hand and led her back out to the porch one final time. The night was clear and cool, perfect for stargazing. Another day in our beautiful life, Franklin said, pulling her into his arms. Another perfect day, Penelope agreed, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood together under the stars, in the place they had built together, surrounded by the love they had created. And Penelope knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. She had arrived with nothing but scars, but Franklin had seen her strength, and together they had built forever.